Joe, you did briefly say when you thought your uncle and father started the yard, but can you tell me a little bit about how that all came about and when about it happened? And
Okay, well, of course, my granddad was a station agent at Muroc, which is now, of course, Edwards Air Force Base, and my father was the first Anglo kid born there in 1912, and my granddad being a station agent for the railroad, when the base came in, then of course everyone had to pretty much leave, and I think Dad was kind of in favor of buying property in Lancaster. My uncle was more interested in Rosamond, and but they kind of had the idea of maybe starting the yard and sell steel and buy scrap and salvage and so on and so forth. At that time, there was quite a bit of war surplus stuff, so they had war surplus trucks and a lot of that boxcar in the back was just full of war surplus stuff, just all kinds of. Well, the other day, I mean, I unwrapped something that was in that Cosmoline. It was almost like brand new after all these years. But they started that, I believe, in about 1948 or 1949. And I believe it was about when they got the property and they fenced it. I think Louis Saravica and Mr. Stuckey were a couple of the guys that either, I think Stuckey owned some of that property. I can't remember about Saravica. I think he was the guy that moved buildings and
yes.
stuff. But that was at about that same time, I think, when they'd had that contract for all those telegraph poles, the cross arms, the wire and the insulators that went from Mojave to Needles, and then they ended up selling the contract from Barstow to Needles, and they took everything down from Barstow to Mojave, and they used those old GI trucks with an A-frame on them with like a PTO winch, which was already, the winch was already on those old military trucks, I think, but they put the A-frames on so that they could, you know, get the poles out of the ground, and then they actually had an old pole dolly and a semi-tractor, and they loaded the poles and stuff on that, and then I think they had a bobtail truck or something that they loaded the cross arms and insulators and all that, and then they brought stuff down and stored it at the yard. And I've actually got some old pictures where when they first built that little building, that tin building, there's just stuff scattered out in the front of that where I guess they'd got stuff war surplus and they just unloaded it all. It was just strung out all over the place. But it was about 1948 or 49, I believe,
about that
when
time,
they started.
yeah. And those poles were the ones that had been originally put in the late 1800s when the railroad was put in.
Yeah, well, during the telegraph era, and I don't know. I mean, we know that the telegraph was kind of short-lived, or the Pony Express was short-lived actually because of the telegraph. And so I imagine that, like you said, the telegraphs probably kind of followed the railroad.
Right.
Would have been one logical
Right.
explanation. And so I don't know for sure when that particular line was put in, but you know, they took it out about that point in time. And one of the things that I thought, well, I never would have thought it if I wouldn't have seen it, but judging by all the rolls of wire that we had in the yard, which was part of that, with those were tapered redwood poles, those telegraph poles. Then they had those cross arms with the steel, a piece of steel going through them that bolted on, and then it had you know, it was like a bolt where the insulator actually screwed onto a wooden piece that you know, went onto that piece of steel. But the wire, I'm not even sure what gauge that was. It had to be somewhere in the neighborhood of around 3/16, I think, of an inch in thickness, whatever gauge that would be. And without a book, I couldn't tell you. But I guess the reason, which seemed awful heavy to me, but my deduction would be that it had to be heavy because of the loss of continuity or whatever, you know.
Right,
So,
yeah, it was an interesting time. the information that we have in the
Mhm.
historical stuff is that the
Mhm.
railroad came through about 1878 or
Mhm.
thereabouts in Roseman.
Yeah.
So that other line probably was maybe before, I would think slightly, but anyway, we're talking about the late 1800s.
Well, and a lot of people, you don't stop and think of it, but if you've ever been, we had some mining claims between, near Amboy, California, which would be like between Barstow and Needles. And if you notice, some of the old railroad lines, there's quite a few of like the old chittum trees or salt cedars, whatever you want to call them. And they actually had guys, that irrigated those. They didn't take a lot of water, but and the reason for that was in some of those places, like down there, the sand was so bad that it would get up on the track, and so they used those as a windbreak.
Yes.
And
yes.
It's just another piece of history, and a lot of people might wonder, well, why did they do it?
Right.
But,
Yeah, I know when I was a child, I remember as we go between Imperial Valley and LA, there's a place there not too far from Palm Springs where they have this whole line of salt cedars along the railroad track, and that's to protect it from the sand blowing and covering the railroad track. You said your family had a mining claim out by Amboy. Did you mine there and other places?
Yeah, but Dad, that was his first love. I mean, my uncle really enjoyed, the scrap and the steel business and stuff. But my dad, he was probably a miner and a prospector first.
Okay.
And he loved the equipment. He loved the just, prospecting and looking for mines and also just the mining process. And so, that particular mine was one of the ones I remember when I was the youngest, because I'll never forget one time, Dad, because on those BLM leases and stuff, you have to do assessment work yearly. And that amounted to like several hundred or $1,000, whatever it was at the time. That was part of the old 1876 mining laws or whatever. And so Dad, I think, was down doing assessment work there at the Vulcan, all by himself. There were several old shacks down there, and we stayed in some of those when we were there. Well, Mom one day was gonna go with us two boys, and I'm gonna guess I was probably about 8 years old, and my brother was probably about 5. And we got down there, and there was a little store there near Amboy, and then you crossed the railroad tracks, and it was several miles to get up to where the old Vulcan mine was. And Mom took a wrong turn, and it was late in the afternoon, and we ended up getting stuck, or the battery ran down or something.
Oh dear.
So we could see Dad in one of the old trucks going by, but he was several miles away, and we knew about where the old shack was, so we got my brother in between us, and we started, and by this time it's dark, and so we're heading toward the lantern light of the old shack, and we got there, but by the time we did, my poor little brother was just full of prickly pear cactus. I mean, we had, because we didn't have any light, and we didn't know it, but we were dragging him right through the middle of some of those prickly pear.
No.
So then we spent a good part of the rest of that night picking
spines.
Yeah, spines out of him.
Oh my word.
So that was quite an adventure. But we used to go there from time to time, and that was back in the days when, this was pretty commonplace. You would have like a logbook at places like that. We kept canned goods there. We might have even had a little stack of wood. I can't remember if that old shack had a wood stove in it or not, but maybe we'd even build a fire outside or something. But people would sign into the logbook and say where they were from, and people at that time were very good about it. You'd tell them, use the stuff, but please don't tear things up, and most of them wouldn't. They were glad to be able to come and use things and maybe have a little food if they didn't bring something or whatever. And so those were really good times, and when we'd been up there with a lot of different friends and relatives. I had one uncle that was just a terrible snorer, and I remember him being there. It was like a 2-room shack, and
Oh dear.
we would cook in one room and then sleep in the other
Oh,
one.
dear.
So everybody was pretty much together,
Yeah, yeah.
And, but yeah.
So that would have been about what time frame?
Oh, well, I was born in 52, so if I was 8, that would have been, say, about, what, 1960?
Okay.
And we had that, actually, I think, even before my dad died, he was probably in his, at least in his 70s, if not in his 80s at the time. I remember going there one time to visit him in the middle of the summer when it was in that part, because that's in the lower desert, not the higher desert. And it had to be over 100 degrees. There was no shade in sight. And when I pulled up on Dad, he was out there working. He was trying to mill some ore or something and do some sampling. And he's just out there in the middle of, the sun beating down on him. And he's just working like a, and it didn't bother him a bit because he loved it,
Yeah, it amazes me when I look at old pictures to see how people lived.
Yeah.
And they often traveled, sometimes, in early days on foot.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just amazing.
Yeah.
Well, did your family mine up in this area also?
Yeah, we had more BLM claims. Most of them were like mining claims, but some were like mill sites. So I think there was about around a dozen 20-acre claims off of Silver Queen Road, north of the Soledad Mountain, where Golden Queen Mining from Canada is mining now. And so I believe I had went to school in Rosamond from kindergarten to 7th grade.
Because I had you as a student in
Yes,
7th
I
grade.
remember that
Yes,
for
yes.
science, I think.
Yes.
And Dad came home one evening, and at that time, I actually, as a 7th grader, I was selling magazine subscriptions, and at that time, the 8th graders took a field trip to Catalina.
That's right.
And I had walked across Rosamond Boulevard, and the Barnes family lived there, Glenn and Isla Barnes.
Okay.
And they had some horses, and they had a Shetland pony. And when I'm talking to Isla, she told me, she said, you guys are welcome to come over and start riding this pony if you want, because we've got it for our grandchildren, and it needs some exercise.
Good work, yeah.
Well, we took her up on that, and that little pony was, he was from the stock of the devil. I mean, but a lot of those ponies are hard to get along with.
They're cantankerous.
They are. So
Yes.
then we met Jack and Gladys Adams,
Yes.
and Dad had come home one day, and he'd already, I guess, talked it over with Mom, and he was trying to tell us boys, he said, if you're going to have to work for them, but if you guys want to have horses and stuff, if we move up there to the old Whitmore, you can do it. So we said, yeah. So we go up there, and shortly thereafter, we found an ad in the paper or something for 3 burros with pack saddles in Inyokern. And we for $75, and we wanted those burros. So we rented a trailer, and Roy Loomis used to be one of the partners we had there at the Whitmore in the mining.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's over on the north side of Soledad, is it?
yeah, it would be across Silver Queen Road on the north side of Silver Queen Road, or like across the paved road. And you can still see remnants of the old mill that they put in. We put a flotation mine in there, like during the 60s, I guess, and 70s. And we actually milled some more. And it's a shame, but I remember in my younger days, of course, Dad, he started teaching us, how to dig post holes and put up fence, and we got these burros, and then later on we went to horses, and I had another uncle that came and one time helped us build an arena, and because we started riding calves and steers and stuff at rodeos and one thing and another, but Dad wanted to move up there so that he could work more in the evenings and on the weekends.
Right.
And so what he would do sometimes after dinner or supper, he'd say, okay, it's 6 o'clock, I want to go down and work in the mine for maybe a couple hours. So I'd say, that's fine. So we had some of those old military phones, the crank ones, you know, that we had one in the house, one in the hoist house, and I think one on the 100-foot level at the Whitmore, another one down at the bottom in the 200-foot level. So I would hoist him down on the same hoist that you'd bring the ore and stuff up in that ore bucket. And he'd, you know, give me the bells, like 3 and then a pause and 2 bells that there's a man aboard to go down. And then, you know, later on, I knew he was going to call me a couple hours later, so about 8 o'clock, if I was at the house or at the hoist house, I'd be listening for the phone, and he'd ring and he'd say, okay, I'm going to go to the station and I'll give you the bells and you can bring me up. And I would. And then other times I would be there and they'd be tramming ore and stuff, and which means that they had an air tugger, which was like a Fresno that a guy'd have to get on that by hand, but it was an electric winch, and you would scoop the dirt up, kind of up on a slope platform, and then load the mine cars, and then you would tram them or push them about the length of that drift on mine rail until you got to that ore bucket, and they were in dump cars. You would dump it in the ore car, and then they'd give you a different signal if you were hoisting ore than if you were hoisting men, because when you're hoisting ore and stuff, time is money, and you did it faster. So I'd get the bells when the bucket was loaded, and I'd hoist it up. And then on the way down, you would never do this when you were letting men down, but when you're hoisting ore and stuff, I'd actually release the brake and let it freewheel.
Drop, yeah.
But not, you know, you still had to feather the brake on it and not just let it go. But I remember doing that, and then there was an old gallows frame, and you'd bring that bucket up, and there were like a couple pieces of metal, and you'd go up above, there were a couple of notches. Well, when you went up above those, it would flip these pieces of metal over, and then you'd let it down, and the bucket had like a couple of metal tips or whatever on the sides, and it would go down in there, and then you could dump the bucket in a dump truck, which went to the first crusher, the primary crusher, and then when you went back down, you'd have to, I can't remember all the technique, but those arms would flip back over so that the bucket would go back down the hole again. And I mean, that was just a good place for a kid to grow up on a couple 100 acres and have, you know, burros and horses and you know, and then learn something about the mining business and
yeah,
you know.
That's interesting. So then your father was more interested in the mine, but your uncle was, you know, doing the yard more, but your father spent time at the yard.
They both started that together, and then in about 1975, I had went a couple years to college, and my brother was out of high school, and my dad wanted to retire, and then he basically all the rest of his life, while he was still in good health, he either was buying and selling mining equipment or prospecting and mining, and so they wanted to know if we wanted to get in or not, and we did. And I think we became partners in January of 1975, and my brother got married that summer, but then we lost him at 20 years of age. It was tragic.
Yeah.
And but then my uncle were in partners for about 20 years together, and then he passed away in 1995.
Yeah, I was going to ask when he passed away. Yeah.
And then I was there until about 2001 by myself, and a lot of things had changed, and so I needed to make some changes, and I just basically kind of shut it down and walked away from it.
Okay, so about 2001.
One.
Okay, I just because I couldn't remember.
Mm-hmm.
You know. Okay. All righty. Well, you said that you had gone away, so you went to school in Roseman until you were finished with the 7th grade. Then you went to Mojave.
Mm-hmm.
And then you went to?
I went a couple of years to Cal Poly San Luis
Okay.
Obispo, and I actually lived there in Santa Margarita for a few years, and I ended up with like an AA in animal science. I had a terrible time with math all through high
I
school.
remember you saying that in the
Yeah.
video, right?
And English and speech for me were easy. In fact, I remember one time when I was looking for classes, I had one speech class, and the lady, I had a lady professor, and she told me, she said, "I hope you didn't buy the book for this class." She said, "You break every rule they ever wrote in the speech book," she said, "for one, except for one," and she said, "That is, you get your point across." And she said, if you can do that, none of the rest of them matter.
Right.
So I that was an easy class for me, and I had a really good time and met good people in it. And then I had an English class, and I was spending all my time doing homework, trying to do basic algebra, which I had taken in high school and didn't understand it either. And but then I had that English class, and I was writing some of those English lit papers 15 minutes before the class started.
Oh dear.
And but if I didn't get an A, the guy had me in, and he was asking me what's wrong, and he told me, you don't belong in this class. I ought to move you up. And I said, well, I'm struggling with math. I'd appreciate it if you don't. So he didn't.
Didn't want to have more challenges
Yeah.
to deal with. You also spent a lot of time with horses because you did rodeo stuff, correct?
Yeah, we started out like riding some calves and then steers and so on and so forth. And of course, some of the guys like Jim Williford just really changed my life, because I mean, guys like him and Tom Leftwich and Harry France, and I don't know if I can name everybody, but there were just a lot of those guys that, you know, they were either involved with like Boy Scouts or the Kiwanis and so on and so forth. And they first, in the Roseman Roping and Riding Club, they built that arena there on the school property. And I remember when that was finished, it was just an arena. They had some gymkhana and horse shows, but no bucking chutes, no roping chutes, no nothing. But then Jim had an interest in Little Britches Rodeo,
Yes.
and so a lot of us kids got into Little Britches Rodeo, and you know, we were riding steers and bucking horses and roping and so on and so forth. And like nowadays, I watch the Cowboy Channel and RFD TV are two of my favorite channels. And Pam Minnick, she married a Minnick, and he was like a stock contractor, and she's one of the commentators on the RFD and the Cowboy Channel. I remember when, I'm gonna guess, she's probably a little bit younger than me. She was a Miss Rodeo America at one time. Her and her sister and another younger kid from Vegas actually entered those rodeos right there in Rosemont.
I have a lot of pictures of that from Jim Williford's property, and I should probably have you sit down and look at them, because you might know who some of these people are. I could pick out kids I knew. I could pick out Russ and
I have
a
looked at
few
some,
others, yeah, but
and
I
some
have a
people I
ton
don't
of them.
remember.
Okay.
And then in later years, they did not have high school rodeo when I was in high school, but my brother participated in high school rodeo. And I actually, one year, was the adult president of District 9 High School Rodeo Association, and that went south to Selmar, north to Bishop, west to Bakersfield, and east to Apple Valley. And
Wow.
that was a
That's
big district.
Big district, yeah.
We had rodeos in Bakersfield, Lone Pine, Bishop, Ridgecrest, I think Lancaster. I can't remember if we ever had one at Roseman, possibly. But we used to have meetings north of Mojave, between Mojave and Jawbone Canyon, at the old Cinco
Station.
which at that time, that bar and grill was owned by Jay and Sylvia Sprague.
Oh, okay.
And
Yeah.
their son, Sean, and their daughter were both part of high school rodeo. That's how I met that family, and that's where we had meetings, because that was kind of a central
Yeah.
place.
Midway, yeah,
Mhm.
very good. Well, there's so much history. you know, as I say, I have all of that stuff that came from Jim Williford on the Little Britches Rodeo. I have
Yeah,
a box of things that, you know, the Historical Society
yeah,
needs to get.
those were great days.
Yeah,
For
interesting.
me, it was a life changer, because that was what was always my passion, was rodeo and ranching and just the Western way of life, you know. And I worked for a living doing other things, but that's what I always loved, so.
You were involved in, I think, something that happened when they were moving mules with pulling a wagon from up north. It hasn't been too long ago that you participated in that. Was it kind of a 20 mule team reenactment? I'm just vaguely remembering.
Well, actually, I had, when we had a friend and a customer, we belonged to Corral 14 of the Equestrian Trails Incorporated, and that Corral 14 was not so much of a riding club like most of the ETI is. It was a wagon club, and we met Chet St. Clair, who actually was the president at the time, and then also we met Freddie Valentino in Lancaster, that worked for the Arkland boys that had the dump there in Palmdale before Waste Management bought them out. And I went with my oldest son Gil in 1993, was our first year to go to Death Valley, and then we ended up going from, I think I went from 93 to 97, and I think my son Gil went until 98 on those wagon drives through there.
Okay.
And that usually they started at Ashford Junction, or I can't remember the other monument, but then they ended up in Furnace Creek. And then we also went on some wagon drives that started at the Film Museum in Lone Pine, and we ended up at the Forest Service corrals and stuff in Bishop right before Mule Days.
Oh, okay.
So, but there was also, I wasn't a part of this, but I think Raleigh Davis and Jeff Davis, Raleigh I think cooked some deep pit barbecue because they had that 100-year anniversary thing.
I think
where
that's
the
what I'm
people,
thinking
from
of,
the
yeah.
Owens Valley had come with a
That's
bunch
what
of
I'm
riders, and they were out west there along the aqueduct.
Right, I was gonna say, they followed the aqueduct.
Yes, they
That's
did,
what
and
I
they
was
went all the
thinking of.
way into Los Angeles. And I wish I would have, known about that earlier, and I probably would have tried to be a part of it, but.
Yeah, and that's not been that long ago.
No, I mean, time flies, but I think, within the last 10 years
so
or something,
also.
yeah. Because it was a 100-year anniversary, and that aqueduct, I believe, was built right around the turn of the century,
Okay.
if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Is there anything else, Mac, that you can think of that we need Joe to cover?
I wish that we could have, the last time, it's been probably 6 months or a year ago, but once in a while I would drop in at the old Silver Queen off of Silver Queen at the old Whitmore. And I wish that I would have took pictures and stuff and documented that,
I do
because
too.
during the Obama administration, the hoist house is totally gone, the old hoist, the gallows frame is gone. All the shafts have been covered, and they've got metal and stuff over the top of them. Right next to the hoist house, there used to be a great big, like a one-lung air compressor with like about a 5-foot flat flywheel that ran on a flat belt, and all of that stuff is gone.
Gone.
That part of the old shack is still there that we lived in when we moved up there, and but it, there again, it's just history that if you wouldn't have known it,
Right.
it's gone.
Was that part of the land that was sold to, or leased by Golden Queen?
It's still
It's on
BLM
the other-
claims,
it's still
yeah,
BLM.
and when
Okay.
after my dad had died, Glenn Mullins had helped me get rid of some scrap and stuff in the yard, and I didn't get rid of everything until here recently, but he was interested in the Whitmore, and I didn't want to do the assessment work on it, and I didn't think I was going to do anything where it would be productive, so I ended up quick claiming that over to him.
Okay.
And he had it for a few years, and then I think after he died, his daughter had it for a time, and then I can't remember his name, but there was another man here that's still here that's in the mining business, that Lee Garnsey. He had it or at least was trying to get it, but now I don't know what's going on with it. It might have reverted back to the BLM if the assessment work hadn't been done on it.
Okay, I didn't know just exactly how that works.
Well, and what happened there too is years ago, Shell Mining Company did a lot of work on the old exposed treasure, which was right to the east of us. And the Berry boys were owned that property, I think, or had the mining claims on it. And they drilled a bunch of holes on the Whitmore property, but the trouble of it is there was too much overburden, and which meant that they had to go underground.
Yeah.
They couldn't heap leach like they did there, and then like they're doing at the Golden Queen on the Soledad. So it just wasn't profitable, and then they didn't want to deal with there's a whole new set of rules when you mine underground. So.
Oh, I did not realize that.
Yeah, in fact, Dave Kiefer, working for the Burton
Burtons,
brothers, they're dealing with that right now.
Are they still active? Because I have.
They are. They I think are mining, and they have plans to ship ore to Nevada to be milled. So I mean, they have struggled for years and years. A lot of that's been like with the water issues and so on and so forth, but also just all kinds of regulations. Our government has just got where it's very, very anti-mining because of environmental things and so on and so forth, and so it's a tough road, but hopefully they're gonna break the barrier and be successful.
Yeah, I do too. I know that they were doing underground mining, but they were doing it at a slant so they could actually drive vehicles in.
Yeah, I have not been to the property. I do know that it's in
It's in
Middle
that
Butte
Middle
area,
Buttes, yeah.
which of course is like near Bacchus Road, and it would be like north of Bacchus Road, but like east of Tehachapi Willow Springs.
Yeah, no, yeah.
But I haven't actually been to the property. And yeah, even the phone thing, they were required to have, I think, cell service or something underground, which they had to have a special antenna in order to.
Oh my word.
Yeah, but it was because of emergency stuff.
Right.
And because I do see Dave Kiefer, from time to time, and him and I are actually both on the Lands of Promise Mutual Water Association
Oh, okay.
board,
Okay.
and plus we're good friends because he had the feed store, and he helped my son Gil with the harness, and
He's helped us a lot.
I have a saddle that Dave Kiefer built by hand, and
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, he's quite a guy.
Yeah. In fact, we should probably think about interviewing him.
You should, okay? He's like all the rest of us. He's not getting any younger.
That's right. That's right. Well, is there anything else you can think of?
Really, I can't. Like I said, I still, like, one reason that I had mentioned Martin Engel to you is like I said, the little post office there in Cantil, he ran that, but he was an assayer, and guys like my dad and Cecil Burton, those were two guys. I have met so many characters in my life as a result of all the different things that I've been a part of: the mining business, the scrap business, the steel business, rodeo, ranching, the wagon thing, but because there's just all these different little niches. Even the wagon thing, if you think you can get in a wreck riding a horse, try hitching them to
To a
something.
wagon.
Yeah, and it becomes exponential. You hitch one, and that's a little dangerous, and you hitch two, and that's a little more dangerous, and it just goes on from there. But yeah, there were a lot of guys, of course, that came into the Pauley brothers' yard and stuff, mining guys, because my dad was there, and my uncle also. He did like the mining, well, to a large extent, because those guys, they believed in the gold standard, and real money was gold and silver.
Gold, yeah.
You know, and all my life I have heard, you know, the Federal Reserve System is not federal and has no reserve. You know, you know, and I heard about all the New World Order government and everything, and then for years, you know, a lot of people would say, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist, but the truth of the matter is, no, I'm a conspiracy realist, you know, but a lot of guys, you know, they had big plans. They weren't really prospectors or miners, they were promoters,
Yeah.
and they were always trying to weave nothing into gold. And every mine that has been discovered probably in the history of the world, it was with a gold pan or a dry washer or something where you can see color,
Right, you can
and then
actually
you
see it,
take
yeah.
it to a man like Martin Engel that you know is proficient at what he does, and actually Dave Kiefer too is a good assayer, and he knows. He learned, I think, from Cecil Burton or maybe from someone else, but you have to be very careful that you don't get yourself salted. In other words, clean stuff up good so that you assayed something for somebody else and it was real rich.
Right.
Yeah, and you're passing it over and it's not accurate. So
Yeah, you need to make sure your equipment's clean from at the beginning, yeah.
So, but Martin was a guy, Dad always wanted me to write and stuff, and I think I probably somewhere have still got notes, because the plan was to maybe do something about Martin Engel's life, and I never did it. And I'm still going through papers. I may end up stumbling across
Something,
yeah, his life story. I you know, I just don't know. I went to school with one of his granddaughters, Lori Motti. Well, it was Lori Templeton, and then when she married Sam Motti at Mojave.
Mojave.
So.
Well, I'd like to have a few more fingers, meaning the Historical Society, get a few more fingers into the community of Mojave, because there's a lot of information there. Now, I know they have a museum they're working on in Mojave, but it's an air and transportation. And I'd like to have some of these family stories and people stories.
Well, there's you hit on something there that interests me. My current tax man is Danny Carroll.
Yeah, mine too.
From the Carroll family, and so he's a guy that you should talk to.
Yeah, I've tried to get him to have his dad come and talk to us.
And he's still alive.
He's still alive,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Although I remember him as being a little bit of a abrupt human being. I don't know if you had that,
yeah.
but I remember seeing him up at Carol's department store, and he was a little bit of a curmudgeon.
Yeah, well, but still, if you could get him, it would be good.
I know.
And but yeah, the Carrolls. One of the things about Mojave that I have never been able to understand. I mean, I know that a lot of the people are really into the aerospace thing and everything, which is fine, but I can't believe that no one. I would love to know where the 20 mule team wagons were built, and if I was going to build a museum in Mojave, that's where I would prefer to have it, would be where those wagons were built.
Yeah.
And I mean, that was quite a feat, you know.
Oh, I know.
And
I know.
actually, those wagons, of course, have been in the Rose Parade, and they were just a few years ago, they were restored. They were built brand new, but by a wagon guy in I think Montana, and actually there's some video, I think, of that on YouTube.
Oh.
And those wagons right now, they're home when they're not being used. Bobby Tanner, his family is in the packing and resort business in the Bishop area, but Bobby was instrumental in getting the 20 mule team all put together so that they were able to function and take them around with the wagons and drive them different places. There's another guy, but he's in Bishop. But I think I've got a film about Bobby and some people going through some of the places, some of the route that's now on the Naval Weapons Center.
Right.
But they had went through part of the original route. But those wagons are all stored at the Laws Railroad Museum, north of Bishop.
North of Bishop,
Mhm.
right.
There's a special barn there that they built for them.
Wow.
And those are the ones the new ones that they
Put
built.
together. They're enormous.
And the old ones, I think, are still or one set of the old ones is still out there at the Boron at the museum, where they had the plastic mules out in the front of them.
And that's something that when we can travel again, we need to get a field trip out to the Boron Museum.
That would be a good one, and I would be hopeful maybe one of these times we could take a field trip to the Tejon Ranch.
Right,
That's
Right.
very historical.
right.
And in fact, there's books and stuff. I mean, that's another thing that I regret. I knew Lawrence Duntley, but I never knew Raleigh Duntley.
Raleigh, yeah.
You see some of those old pictures of Raleigh riding a horse, usually with a hackamore on it, that's all that Spanish vaquero
Right,
horsemanship and
right,
everything,
yeah.
which well, some of our members, the Dunn family,
Right.
Jeremy's very much into the vaquero horsemanship.
The hackamore.
The hackamore and the two.
I've only ridden a horse one time with a hackamore,
Mhm.
but yeah.
And then the two rein and the spade bit and everything. That was quite a method of horsemanship, and it was it actually spread to other parts of the West, but California, that horsemanship and other things were very specific to California. I mean, just like the sailing ships from Boston coming to San Diego and Santa Barbara, and in that book, which I've got that on my Kindle, 2 years before the math, but by Dana.
Yeah,
That quite a book.
I have not read that, I need to do that.
Yeah.
Put that on my reading list.
It's the history and then there again, like I say, this area just the proximity that we have to Tehachapi, because I've never thought of it before, but there's a very good book about that, the Three Valleys of Tehachapi, which is like the Cummings Valley, the Tehachapi Valley, and Bear Valley, and all the history of the ranching and the farming and everything and so on and so forth. But I never stopped to think about it, but when you stop and think about it, absolutely it's the truth. That's where the Mojave Desert, the southeastern Sierra, and the southern San Joaquin, that's the junction, is Tehachapi.
That's right,
And then here we are, not very many miles away on the desert floor.
right.
You know, it's amazing.
Yeah, it truly is. It's interesting for people, they don't even understand that the early travel was through Tehachapi.
Yeah,
Through Willow
Yeah.
Springs and then south,
Yeah.
because they went from water to water.
exactly. And when you think of there again, what the horse and the mule and oxen have done in the settling of this country, I actually picked up a book. I ordered that special. A friend of mine in Tehachapi, there was a book written by another man whose name I can't remember, but he was from Cantil back in the 60s, about like the different breeds of horses in the United States, and he was talking about the contribution of the horse to the civilization. And of course the mule, in Bishop, they're still trying to, build a museum to the mule.
To the mules.
Because the mule, a lot of people don't, really give the mule all the credit that he deserves, and he goes all the way back to George Washington.
Yeah.
George Washington was one of the big promoters of mules, and he got mules from the King of Spain and the King of France, I think, which started the herd here in America. And George Washington said, that a mule can work longer on less feed than water than a horse, and they come in all different sizes.
And they are something else as far as personalities.
They are.
They really are.
Yeah.
I saw a mule one time. I was down in the Saugus area, and there was a big mule ranch down there, and I was having to sit in the car and wait for somebody. And this mule must have spent 30 minutes but he worked on that opening to the
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 gate?
yeah, to the
Mhm.
gate, and he got himself out.
Mhm.
It was,
Yeah,
perseverance.
they are very, very smart.
Yeah.
And they claim that, I mean, the horse is amazing. I mean, when you look at wars and stuff that have been fought, not to mention, just as a beast of burden, moving people and goods and so on and so forth, freighting and riding and what have you, but a lot of horses will do something. They can be trained. I mean, that's another thing about this area and vaquero horsemanship. There's paintings of the vaqueros roping grizzly bears with rawhide rietas on bridle horses.
Oh my word.
Yeah, and you're not going to do that on a mule. So a horse can be trained to do something that he could hurt or kill him, because he's that's kind of the mind that he's got. But a mule, I've often heard one good thing about a mule, and I believe it pretty much, is that he's not going to do anything that's going to get you hurt, probably because he doesn't want to get hurt himself.
That's interesting. Well, I've not really ever been around mules, but
We've only had 2 in my lifetime, but that was another thing to my son and I that was such a blessing, was being able to meet the Cameron family and everything we learned from Denzel Cameron. He got me a few little movie jobs, and this mustache I only shaved it one time, and that was for a little job that I got right there near his place, where I doubled an actor for a commercial from England.
Oh, that's interesting.
And I came on a Friday, and me and a few other guys rode our horses around, and one of the movie guys picked a couple of us out. We come back Monday, and I rode around with Denzel and his son, and they were doing some filming, and then they ended up picking me to double this guy. So the next day or two, I showed up about 6:30 in the morning or something, and I was at the food truck pretty much all day long in wardrobe, and they didn't want me until dusk. And at dusk, we were over there near Densel's at one of those little hills,
Right.
those outcroppings, and they wanted me to ride this horse from around the back, come up, rear it up, and then I did that probably 20 times on 2 different horses. But they wanted it right at dusk, and then again about the time it got dark. So right before and right as it got dark, and I never saw any of that footage or anything, but
it
was
be interesting.
Yeah, and it was something I got to do, and then there was another time Denzel and a few of us, we did some kind of a poster shot there at his place for, I think, Yamaha motorcycle or something, and then I hauled 6 head of horses to Stanford University for the halftime at the football game one year.
Oh my word!
And there were several of the people in Rosamond. I think Tom Leftwich, I think, went to that. One of the Jones girls, several different people. And when we got up there, I didn't know to start with if I was going to be in the thing or not. But it was Denzel Cameron and Monty Montana on a stagecoach. And at halftime, they drove the stagecoach around the outside of the football field. And then the Indians, and the Jones girl was one that was an Indian, they were chasing the stagecoach. And then myself and some other guys, we were the cavalry, and we were chasing the Indians.
Oh, how interesting.
Yeah, so then that was...
About what year do you think this probably was?
Oh, my goodness. I'm going to guess, what... 80s,
okay,
maybe
80s.
Possibly 90s,
Okay.
somewhere along in there.
Okay. Is there anybody out at Denzel's place? I think of it every time I go down the freeway. Somebody is living out there.
When Denzel passed, his wife Jerry remained there, and the one son is also a horse trainer, and he at the time was up, I think, somewhere around the Santa Ynez Valley. He used to work in that area a lot, but then he ended up coming down here to help take care of his mother.
Okay.
And it was hard for him to break into this area, but he's doing very well. In fact, he kind of
So is he living out there?
he lives out there, and he got into.
And she has passed away.
No, she's
still out there
alive.
too?
I
Oh, my
talked to her
goodness.
this morning.
Oh, is that right?
I did. In fact,
I remember her.
yeah, she's a great gal and a great horsewoman, and
I met Denzel only maybe once or twice, but I used to see her quite a bit, yeah.
Denzel was quite a crusty character, but boy, he was a great horseman,
Yeah.
and we sure learned some stuff. And my oldest son Gil actually got to work with him a lot more than I did, because my son Gil worked for Doc Fly, the veterinarian.
Yeah.
He had a clinic. Well, he actually had an office there in Courts Hill, where he did the small animals, but then he had a mobile unit, and he did horses and cattle and buffalo and
Sure.
everything. And my son went with him on a lot of those mobile calls. And then Doc was also part of our ETI club, and he had mules. And so Denzel was training some of his mules, and then Gil was the helper.
Oh,
So
okay.
Gil has become a very good teamster.
Very
I
good.
really trust Gil, and he knows a lot, and he knows how to be safe and what works and what doesn't
Good.
work, and
Good,
yeah.
very good. Okay, well, anything else? Okay, well, Joe, this has been fabulous.
Well, I thank you very much.
Well, thank you for your
It's
time.
been great, and like I said, I'm glad I've been able to get more involved in the Historical Society. When you're working, it just seems like
Yeah,
and you've got family, you
yeah,
know.
yeah, but I think that the Historical Society has a lot to offer people.
I think so
Yeah.
too, yeah.
Yeah, I do too. Okay, we're done.